Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar. We'll give a couple of minutes for people to join. I'm Romain Gauthier. I'll be your host today for this first Didomi webinar of 2025. No, actually, it's the second. Sorry about that. I'm joined today by two great speakers, experts in their field. Klaudia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Klaudia Galué. I'm a legal consultant specializing in the GDPR and data protection compliance. I've been already working 7 years in the field. So I've been mostly advising tech companies on privacy and data protection compliance topics. And now with the AI regulation gaining momentum, the EU AI Act is also increasingly becoming part of my work. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining. Great to have us with you. And we are also here today with Chris, joining from Australia. Hello, Chris.
Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone we're in. My background is I was originally out of the UK. I then spent 7 years in digital media in Australia for ASX listed, the first ASX listed digital media buying agency. But then I went across to the US and opened up the US office for the first tag management system. So my background is very much coming from the ad tech and the MarTech realm. In Australia, Civic Data started 3.5 years ago to guide marketers through changing privacy laws here, but more importantly, how to also plug the hole when it comes to identity, measurement, analytics, and so on. So I'm the tagging expert on the call.
That's great. We have a very rich agenda today. So the theme of the webinar is to explore data privacy trends for 2025. Obviously, there is a lot to say, so we will not pretend to be exhaustive today. And so to help us frame this discussion, we'll start first by a short retrospective of 2024, which has been, I would say, an intense year for data privacy professionals and in general everyone affected by data privacy in their daily jobs. So we've had like a first part of the year that was pretty active, with a lot to be said in terms of decisions with the European Court of Justice deciding over the IAB Europe PCF case, with the EDPB, so the group of the European data protection authorities, releasing an important opinion on the pay or OK model, and with several data protection authorities taking stances, sometimes hard stances, on key topics with respect to data privacy. So we put here on the screen the CNIL new guidelines for app, so mobile app, which I think are very dense and rich and impossible to read, and say a lot about where data protection authorities are putting their attention, especially here in Europe. And next to that, we've seen a number of large and important organizations establishing also some new rules with respect to data privacy, with Google releasing their consent mode version 2, new connected TV consent requirements, Apple doing what Apple does, so establishing new ways for users to control, in terms of user experience, what sort of data would be collected on their devices with the Apple distraction control, and a lot of other important milestones for data privacy. Before I continue forever, Klaudia, what is for you the main data privacy event of 2024? What has been the most important one for you in particular?
You know, I actually spent quite some time on the Linden Apotheke ruling. So this ruling was delivered by the European Court of Justice, and the case originated in Germany. This case, you need to read it by yourself because it has a lot of details and nuances. But just in short, one pharmacy. It was about one pharmacy suing another pharmacy that was selling medicines on Amazon for not obtaining explicit consent for the processing of health data. And to settle the dispute, the German court asked the European court two questions. So the first one, actually, can a competitor sue for a data protection violation? And this is important because the GDPR doesn't say anything about competitors taking legal action. So it only mentions data protection authorities and data subjects, so the affected individuals, and also certain organizations like consumer protection groups, but not competitors. And here the court said that if the national unfair competition law allows for it, then yes, it is possible. And then the second question was whether actually this explicit consent was needed. And to answer this one, we need to actually look at whether the data related to the order of this medicine is health data. And the court in this case said that yes, mostly because you can link the medicine's therapeutic use to the person ordering it. And it was very interesting that it did not matter that the medicine didn't need any prescription, or that, you know, one person could order it or for, you know, on behalf of another person. These arguments didn't work. And yes, I'm fascinated by this case and how, you know, wide consequences it could have for, you know, other special categories of data, because here we were talking about health data, but actually, you know, we can look at the at all other special categories of data, and then, you know, we can ask these questions. So when I order food that is halal or kosher, you know, like is this special category of data revealing my religion? Or, you know, if we order books about, I don't know, Barack Obama bibliography, or you know, Angela Merkel, does it reveal my political opinions? So I think that, you know, the effect of this can be wider. And yes, I'm not sure whether this was the original intention of the GDPR to involve all of this.
No, it's true that we are now like 7 years into GDPR, and we are starting to have solid case law, which I believe was something that was kind of missing, and now we have answers. And so it's true that these questions have been raised for a while, but now we have solid case law around some of them. Not all of them. I think that still some of them are still missing. But it's true that we are making good progress there, and like effectively we see that personal data is somehow contagious. So like you have a lot of consequences over the way you handle personal data, especially when it's sensitive. Chris, on your side, what is the main data privacy event of 24?
Oh, I mean, my head has been so far down the weeds in Australia, as you can imagine. So Australia's privacy legislation has not changed very much since the late 1980s. And finally, the first tranche went live on December the 10th, just last year as well. So for me, the major event in 2024 was Australian privacy law changing. And notably for me also was that the Office of the Australian Information Commission, which is the OAIC, also gave very, very solid guidelines on pixels, tags, cookies, what they can collect. And it actually ties back a little bit to the health data aspect as well, because they're very focused on which type of data is being collected by these tools, because many people probably on the call at the moment, we'll talk about this later on, don't understand just how much data these technologies have access to, can collect. It's not just about a cookie ID. It's not just about the address field or the name field. They could take pretty much anything from the page if given free rein. So that's kind of been my focus is that Australian aspect.
Thank you, Chris. And you're right, there is a lot to be said around tracking. That's actually going to be one of our point of focus. So among all the themes we could have chosen for this 25 trends, we've selected 3 of them, which we think are essential. So first, we'll have a discussion over the key regulatory updates of 25. We are very much, as professionals, first and foremost impacted by regulations, new regulations, the evolution of some existing regulations as well. And so it's always good to have in mind these milestones in the coming months that will impact us. Then we'll make a focus on data collection, which is evolving fast, has evolved fast over the past years, and we think will evolve even faster in 25, talking about cookieless technologies, privacy-enhancing technologies, and a myriad of possibilities that you have right now to collect data in 25. And last but not least, we'll make some predictions. I think that's the game will participate to at the end of this session. So each of us will make one prediction for 25, and I suggest that we gather next year to see whether we were right or not.
I think honestly we should gather in about 3 months' time the speed at which things are changing across AI and everything else.
You're probably right.
I think it's just incredible.
So it's intended to be also a lively session. So if you want to ask questions, there is a tab for that on the bottom right of your screen. There is also the chat where you can ask more general questions. Before we get started, we have also polls that you can participate to indicate your opinion, and we have a first poll around what you think, like around your biggest data privacy challenges for 25. Please let us know what are your challenges, and we'll discuss that as well. So, Klaudia, let's start with you as our legal expert here. Where do you see us like end of 25 from a regulatory standpoint? What will be the most impactful evolution of regulation for us professional? If there is like a couple that you want to zoom into, let us please do.
Okay, thank you. I will actually zoom in the 4 developments that I chose. I will talk about these developments. They are happening in Europe. They are not all the developments, but I will start with DORA. DORA stands for the Digital Operational and Resilience Act, and it is relevant for financial sector. It already applies since January 17. And its objective is to ensure that the financial sector is able to stay resilient in case of, cyber attacks, data breaches, system failures, and other related disruptions. So it applies to 20 types of financial entities, including banks, investment, insurance companies, and also their ICT service providers, so cloud services, software providers, data analytics, and so on. Why do we need DORA? DORA was needed because financial sector is increasingly dependent on technology and tech companies to be able to deliver their services. And this, of course, makes the financial entities vulnerable to cyber attacks and incidents. And this in turn can have impact on other companies, other sectors, and even the rest of the economy. So if you are a financial entity, you're probably fully compliant or at least well on your compliance journey by now. But I wanted just to give a quick heads up for perhaps for ICT providers that work or are planning to work with financial entities. This is something to take a look at and prepare. Because the requirements around vendor due diligence are becoming stricter and stricter. And okay, so let's turn to another major development this year. So also here, I will not go that much into detail. I'm gonna talk about the EU AI Act, and yes, so I'm not gonna go that much into detail because for this we will probably need another full webinar just dedicated to this topic. But I will quickly run through the basics and the key dates to keep in mind. So first of all, the AI Act isn't just for AI developers. It applies also to companies that use, sell, or integrate AI into their products or services. It has extraterritorial effect, just like the GDPR. So this means that it applies also to organizations outside of the EU if their AI affects people in the European Union. The Act follows a risk-based approach. You might be seeing all around the internet the pyramid with the different risk levels. In principle, the higher the risk level of an AI system, the stricter the rules. We have unacceptable risk, we have high risk, general purpose AI, and low or minimal risk. The Act doesn't have one starting date. It rather comes in different phases. So different provisions come at different times. Most of them will apply August 2026, but some obligations are already in effect since last Sunday. So let's break down what is happening this year. So as I said, so since 2 days we have requirements around AI systems with unacceptable risk. These are just prohibited. You just cannot use them at all. And the second obligation is the AI literacy requirement, which involves upskilling your employees or your workforce so that people who use or develop AI have sufficient knowledge, skills, and understanding of the AI to use it in a responsible way. Okay, so what happens next? By May, we expect 2 important updates. They're important because we'll finally get practical instructions on how to comply with many of the provisions. So the first one is the publication of the harmonized standards for key requirements, such as risk management. And the second one is publication of the code of practice for general purpose AI. Then in August, we have another batch of the provisions applying. This time is for the general purpose AI models, including large language models. And then, yes, looking ahead on in August 2026, this is where most of the remaining provisions, including high-risk AI, will start to apply.
We have a first question on the prohibitions of February 2nd. So what is an acceptable risk in the context of the EU AI Act? What can you say about that, Klaudia?
So there is a full list in this Article 5 with I think 8 prohibited uses. In general, these are the systems that pose a significant threat to the to safety and the rights. So one example is the emotion recognition in the workplace or education institutions. There are also manipulative techniques and so on. I get a noise from one of you. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Klaudia.
Let's move to another critical topic for 2025. These are data transfers, so international data transfers. For those who may not know, you cannot just freely transfer personal data outside of the EU. If you want to send data to another country that is outside of the EU, we first need to check whether European Commission has recognized that country as having an adequate level of data protection. If not, we need to use a legally approved transfer mechanism. In majority of cases, or in most cases, these are standard contractual clauses. These are pre-approved contractual terms that include binding provisions to make sure that the data is protected according to the EU standards. I'll stop in here because there's more complications along the way. But the news in here that I wanted to talk about is that the European Commission is working on a new set of standard contractual clauses, and we can expect them to be published in the second quarter. These rules will apply in situations where the recipient in a non-EU country is already subject to the GDPR. So until now, we only had the standard contractual clauses for transfer to recipients that were not subject to the GDPR. In practice, we've been using them as a general solution for all of them because we didn't have an alternative. But I would say it's a pretty good moment to take a look at the data transfers and see what kind of standard contractual clauses you have in case, just to prepare for potential updates. Then another development in here is that the EU-US privacy framework, data privacy framework starts cracking. So this actually, it is not unrealistic that it might become invalid by the end of the year. This is because the new US president dismissed members of one key supervisory authority, and without it, there are serious doubt whether the data privacy framework can still meet the EU privacy standards. It's because it allowed EU citizens to challenge the US government surveillance. So without it, well, it's a good argument to invalidate or start invalidating this framework. One other development that I did not put it on the slides, but also in June, the EU will review the UK's data adequacy decision. And there's a chance that it might not be renewed. And it is because the UK starts changing its data protection laws, and we will see what are the developments. But if it moves too much from the EU rules, there is a risk that the EU will decide not to renew. And this will, of course, complicate the data transfer here as well. Okay, let's...
Fascinating to see that privacy is really being used as a weapon by administrations to, like, in the global scheme of things. It's one of these areas where there is a lot of negotiation and ability to weigh in. I think that's one area where the EU is clearly using that as a way to better negotiate other commercial terms in the global trade war that we are seeing happening around us. So I'm sure it's like 25 will be rich of events like this, where we see privacy and privacy regulation being used as a tool by the EU in these large negotiations.
Definitely. And yes, so finally, if another key area that regulators prioritize this year, and actually I think it's also related, I wanted to talk about the pseudonymization and anonymization of personal data. This is because the debate of whether data can ever be truly anonymized persists now, especially with the AI and its demands for data, but also in the context of international transfers and all of complications that are connected with this. So the EDPB, so the European Data Protection Board, has published draft guidelines on pseudonymization. These are open for public consultation until the end of February. So if you want your feedback, submit your feedback, make sure you keep this deadline in mind. And also the guidelines on anonymization. I've seen that they're also on the pipeline for the EDPBs. So we can also expect, well, at least a draft this year. And I've also seen that the German Data Protection Conference announced plans to provide some practical guidance for companies in this area as well. So yes, I sprinted through some of the changes. I hope I didn't lose you.
Thanks a lot, Klaudia. That's very rich and dense. We can see that, and it's not exhaustive at all. So I think that's the point. With just this selection, we can see how these large trends are already going to affect us. And that's, I think, a good segue for you, Chris. In Australia, where do you see the main like regulation develop? Is there something to expect in 25?
Oh, in regards to AI specifically, yes, absolutely.
In general, I think in regards to AI and privacy, but.
Well, there's already been a bunch of guidance work put forward by our new privacy commissioner here, Carly Kind. In fact, today I saw her repost something that she'd put forward a couple of months ago about this topic, and it's very clear that from what we're seeing, and I'm sure this is the same with a lot of the analytics. I've had a quick look at who's attending the conference to this webinar. Anyone from an analytics perspective would understand how tempting it is to take data collected from the customer experience layer, which would be anything in web, mobile, web, and app, and then feed that into these models. But the problem is, here in Australia specifically, you need to be very clear that you're using data for secondary purposes, such as machine learning, AI, and so on. And I think everyone knows that, well, if you don't know now, you'll know. Once something goes into a model, it's very hard to remove it from that model as well. So if data goes into a model without any type of consent, and you haven't been clear to someone how that can be removed, quite often you might have to delete your entire AI model, because it's basically like scrambling a bunch of eggs together. You can never truly unscramble it as well. So I think that's the bit that's making suddenly people wake up, is they might find that they're not supposed to be doing certain things with customer data, but they've built entire projects around this. So I actually think a lot of work globally, not just here, over the coming months will be very much around not what AI project should we do, but how can we get our customer data ready for the AI era? I think that's the most important aspect that people should be looking at.
Indeed. I think that answers exactly the question that you have on screen, which is what type of strategies would you recommend to navigate these regulatory changes? I think, AI coming to the horizon or being there already. I think it's true that before ingesting data into any AI model, think twice and think about privacy.
Yeah, I think there. So here's you've got the way I explain this challenge for marketers. Is for anyone on the call that may have seen Star Wars, the original movies, where there's one scene where Princess Leia, Chewbacca, Han Solo, C-3PO all end up in this garbage compactor, kind of swamp-like area of these garbage walls coming in and closing in. So you look at people on this call, you've got people who are involved in marketing and media, and they've got this problem already based on GDPR, CPRA, Singapore, and so on, where the ways that browsers themselves operate have been impacted by privacy. So cookie deprecation is the instant example of that. So cookies no longer work in a bunch of browser technologies for measurement purposes. So marketers and analytics teams have to deal with this, and that's not going to slow down. But then you've got the privacy aspect, where privacy leaders need to be sure that what's replacing this cookie to identify and help with analytics and so on is compliant with legislation. So you can't just throw up a hashed ID or a hashed email address, or which we'll talk about shortly, fingerprinting devices. if you haven't got the consent to do that as well. So that's kind of like this world in between these two kind of closing in walls is where everyone pretty much on this call is operating at the moment. It's very hard to get right, which then means you've also got this AI aspect where a lot of businesses are starting to pump any type of output from a Google Analytics or an Omniture, so Adobe Analytics and so on, into various AI models. It's so easy now to take an export and put it into ChatGPT or, dare we say, a DeepSeek, and start to see what's working, what's not. And the question is, do you actually have permission to do that? And if you're a marketer or someone building a martech stack, if you're about to sign off with some new amazing AI enhanced aspect to your existing vendors, have you checked how that plays into those rules as well? So it's a really interesting time actually to be focused on this.
I agree. I think that's a very nice transition to the next topic, which is how data collection is evolving in 2025. And it's true that AI is top of mind for every marketers and in general every person dealing with data these days. It's very tempting to put everything into an LLM model and see what happens. There is a clear governance question that is asked to any organization from small to very large around how this should be governed. And among these big questions, there is one that I think is going to resonate very much with the marketers, which is the idea that tracking is evolving very fast these days. It's been years that people discuss the end of cookies, third-party cookies in particular, and as a result, we've seen a massive proliferation of new ways of tracking people, new ideas. I think everything has been tried there. Chris, what can you tell us about how tracking is evolving in 25? And I know you have a clear perspective on the history of tracking, which I believe not a lot of people are very familiar with. So maybe we could start with that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know if you want to just go to the next slide, I think is a good idea here. So anyone that's been through any kind of presentation the past couple of years would have seen some version of this, but what I've done here is I've actually given a different slant to it. So I'm showing you how tracking has evolved over the past, it's like 30 years pretty much. But more importantly, when privacy laws started to change, what was put in to stop certain things from happening and control certain things as well. So look at this as whack-a-mole, the game where you kind of like you have to hit something as it pops up, and that's pretty much what the regulators have been doing. But where there's a will, there's a way, and ad tech and martech and marketers always found a way to get around something as well and exploit it. I know that because I mean the majority of my first half of my career was around how can I drop 1 billion cookies on people to measure how things are working, and now I kind of advise on how to do that compliantly. So looking at what you've got here, first of all, it was server logs and basic analytics, which did include IP address, URL strings, user agents, referrer URLs, and so on. But then it went on to first and third party cookies. But then we started to see EU cookie law come in 2002, GDPR in 2018, CCPA 2020, which is now CCPRA as well. Then things started happening such as web beacons and pixels. That's when the social media businesses started to also get into the game and add more information about you as you traveled around the internet. Culminating, and I think this is the most important aspect in what we're seeing now in regards to the fingerprinting, which we'll talk about shortly with, I call it CEDR. I don't know if you're supposed to say CEDR, but it's CEDR, which we'll talk about shortly from Google, which is pretty much them saying, hey, we're going to fingerprint, even though they said they wanted to stop fingerprinting. But the one thing I think that's important to touch on here is on the right-hand side, very bottom right-hand side, you'll see that we're mentioning clean room solutions or data clean room solutions as an industry response. But there's an Australian business. I'm a big fan of Australian homegrown tech and solutions, but there's an Australian business here called Dataco, and they're a data clean room that came out of one of the major banks' investment vehicles here. And they were doing a podcast the other day, and they were discussing that no matter how good their tech is, it's still not the ultimate solution. You can't use it to break rules or laws. So, and I know the FTC have discussed this aspect of data clean rooms as well, but I think there was one quote here as part of an investigation into data brokers where data clean rooms were likened to money laundering, because the advertising industry is using a data clean room to get around and skirt regulations. But I actually feel that you should be looking at these data clean rooms as a tool, as you would a car, as an example. So if I pass my driving test and I know I can now drive a car, it doesn't mean that now I've got my license, I can run red lights, drive on the sidewalk, knock people over. There's certain rules you still have to adhere to, even though you've actually got this new tool. And the same is true of these data clean rooms or any other tool as well, and consent management, if I'm going to be open about it. But look, I think we've gone from what was originally actually, if you look at the history of this, I remember back in this is like late 1990s. I remember, and yes, I'm that old, that people were raising their eyebrows that we would collect server logs and we'd look at what people are doing with server logs. Oh, that's terrible that you're doing that. But the fact now that if I'm a social media business, and I've got all of these tags and pixels across every single brand or client website or publisher website of mine, that is collecting so much information about what people are doing on that page. Even if I don't have the app on my phone, that data is still being collected by these social media networks. And a lot of consumers don't even realize that. They'll say, look, I don't have the app on my phone, they're not tracking me. But actually, they are still being tracked, and they don't realize that these social media networks are still collecting a bunch of this information. And on the flip side, agencies and brands are allowing this information to be sent to these businesses as well, which is what the regulators are looking at. So I think on that, why don't we kind of go to the next slide?
Sure. I wanted to suggest that we zoom into this fingerprinting ID. So not everyone is familiar with the idea of fingerprinting.
Sure.
It's been tried repeatedly in the ad tech history as a way to circumvent anti-tracking methodology. So what can you tell us about this new approach of fingerprinting by Google?
So yeah, and I think if there's I don't know if we've actually got it up on the screen. I wasn't looking. Yeah, here we go. So this fingerprint debate's quite interesting. So if you were to look at what Google have come out recently, which is called the Chrome Enhanced Device Recognition. So this is the upcoming fingerprinting technology that they're now launching. I think it's now. I don't think it's actually launched properly yet. And it's actually uniquely interesting that what Klaudia was discussing earlier on about CTV consent, that has to be completed by July 2025. So the timing, as you can imagine, it seems to be very, very relevant that Google want everyone to consent for CTV usage at the same time they're launching this new device fingerprinting technology. Now, they did previously say that they thought it actually lacked transparency, but now they're actually saying that, hey, it's an okay idea. To give everyone on the call an idea of what fingerprinting is, any device, whether it's your app on your mobile phone, whether it's an Android device or an iOS device, or whether it is your Android box in your television at home, or your laptop, a browser on your laptop, the unique combination of your IP address, where you're consistently visiting from, also the configuration of the different plugins on your browser, the language that you've got your browser set to, the battery level, the operating system of your computer. Generally, you can get a very, very, very individual, unique fingerprint of a user through combining all of these different elements. And to the point where, as you were highlighting earlier on, with AI, it's very easy to do that now. So it's very easy to upload mass amounts of information and say, find correlation and causation between these data points here. And it's very easy to individuate people from the crowd, even if they're anonymous as well. And I think that's the key thing about fingerprinting is, can you individuate someone from a crowd, even if they're anonymous, using this device, fingerprinting technology? And the point is pretty much you can most of the time do that as well, which is why you need explicit, well, as much consent as you can get around it. Now, the reason, obviously, and this is just my thoughts on it, but the reason they're looking at doing this and the kind of turnaround of fingerprinting is CTV is the next big frontier on spend for digital advertising. And the ability to buy efficiently, to target efficiently, to ensure that your frequency capping and so on, and this massive growth in the streaming advertising market where you need to cross-track across these different devices, it's needed to enable that kind of visibility for targeting and measurement. So that's why they're looking at doing it. And it's very hard to do that in CTV environments in the absence of cookies and other things as well to do that. So I think my view is on this, it's going to be a case by case based on jurisdictions on kind of how this will be allowed. I think it's going to be a hard thing to get across here based on recent kind of guidance from the OIC on what is individuation and what is singling someone out for the crowd, even if it's anonymous. And I'm pretty sure over there it'll be kind of an interesting conversation as well. But was that a good enough kind of overview on kind of
absolutely,
how it works?
and I think it ties back nicely with Claudia's point on the EDPB producing guidelines on pseudonymization, anonymization. So if it's truly anonymous, like you can't recognize and single out anyone from a crowd, pseudonymization is a different question. And it's true that there is some confusion in everyone's mind around these concepts. And then in general, I think the idea of tracking is still not very clear to marketing professionals and data professionals in general. So we are seeing a lot of initiatives developing that attempt to like solve for these problems of tracking in a way that is more or less privacy preserving, more or less opaque, as you mentioned. And I think that's an interesting development of 25. We are navigating troubled waters where there is technology that exists, that emerge, privacy enhancing technologies. So the temptation of using them, but at the same time doing that in a way that is compliant first and preserving the privacy of end users. So a lot of potential basically, but also a lot of rules that still apply and that should invite for being cautious as a professional. Like out of all the developments, Chris, that you see on like these new alternatives to cookies and to collecting third-party data, what are the ones that for you has the most potential and where you see the most interesting developments happening? I know we didn't rehearse this one, but just wanted to get your thoughts.
No. Look, I mean, it comes down to transparency. So they're all great if the user wants it to happen, and you're not doing it in a dodgy kind of dark pattern, dark nudge, dark sludge kind of way. So if you are being very open, very clear, and getting consent in the right jurisdiction to use certain technologies, then every single one of them is great. I don't mind being cookied on certain things. I'd be absolutely happy to do that. I don't mind my email address being used for certain marketing purposes. But I do mind the fact that a social media company makes it very hard for me to understand how to remove my photo from appearing in people's friend suggestions on their social media network just because I use their messaging app called WhatsApp. I think that's very unfair. So I think there's all of these different technologies are fascinating. As I said, so data clean rooms, all of the different data clean rooms have various ways of solving things. And if used in the right way, they can solve big issues in regards to privacy and compliance. But if you don't have the consent to put that data and use it in a certain way in data clean rooms, you shouldn't be doing that in the first place. That's my view on it. From a server-side tagging perspective, server-side, great from a fidelity perspective. It removes the issue of slow website loads and everything else. But I mean, we wrote an article about this in 2012, that if you stop running pixels and tags in the client, so for those on the call, a browser or the browser will be the user agent or the client. So if you run these different tags and pixels in the client itself, and that's where it collects information, the benefit to that is users have the ability to look at what tags are loading into the page and what's being collected about them. Server-side tagging, however, is a very opaque, kind of non-transparent methodology of passing data between different parties, where the user has no idea that it's gone in that direction, and they just got to trust what you're saying about it as well. So I think server-side tagging has benefits, but again, you've got to be very clear about what you're doing and where it's being passed and keep track of that from a server-side perspective. So the unique ID aspect, I mean, it all basically, I think you're getting the message here. You see what I'm trying to say? It's all based on any of these aspects that you've got here are all great if the user has consented to it, they feel okay with it, and you've got all the permissions to use it. That's what I'd say on those ones.
I think a good way to frame that is to say that you can enhance privacy in multiple ways. Some of them are technological, so there are technologies that can be used to enhance privacy, and some of them are very sophisticated, cryptographic measures that you can take, like homomorphic encryption, zero knowledge proofs, all these sort of very advanced, fancy technologies that effectively and in a technological way protect individuals' privacy. But they need to work alongside organizational measures that need to be built into the user experience, into the user information that are linked to consent, to the idea of minimizing how much data you collect at every step of the way. So it's I think both are needed. So both organizational measures and technological measures, they need to work well together. And so you can do server-side tagging in a privacy-preserving way, but you need to be transparent to the user. User still needs to consent to some of the data sharing that you run server-side. It needs to be clean and auditable, so that it is compliant. And so all that makes it an interesting option to alleviate the need for third-party cookies and tracking, but it needs to be done in a certain way to be successful. That's how we see it at Didomi, and I think in general, like the way 25 will probably develop. So combining interesting privacy enhancing technologies with solid governance and organizational measures, and where consent will play an important role as well.
I think the other aspect of that is we go back to what Klaudia was talking about in regards to overseas data transfers and everything else. The question is, where are these servers located? So if there is someone says we've got a great new way of doing a server, well, where is that server sitting? Where are you sending that information to allow that to happen as well?
Absolutely. I think from a sovereignty standpoint, it has also merits to be in control of the first point where the data that is collected lands, and that it's something that you fully control before sharing data. I think that has also that is an interesting idea in a world where I think the location of data will matter more and more, as we can see.
I also think
it's.
No, I just wanted also to jump in a little bit because you're mentioning consent, and we also have to keep in mind that it's a very challenging way also of obtaining consent, provided legally required information, and not to overwhelm or like explain it in a way that the user actually really understands what is going on with this data. I think this is one of the biggest challenges we're facing, right? Because it's actually how to balance all the information that is required by the by law, the background knowledge or of the user. Also, that there comes a bit of effort in this as well. And
Absolutely.
also,
And
the
to be
requirements
honest,
of different jurisdictions.
consent is not the only solution. So I think there are other ways than just asking for consent.
Well,
Be
that's
thoughtful about it.
that's the unique aspect. So in Australia, there was 4 years almost of consultation, and I think we were still the only marketing technology focused business that put submissions into the review of the Australian Privacy Act here in Australia, through our kind of unique lens. Now, one of the aspects that didn't make it into this first tranche, because the changes were literally put forward as kind of the first half of a couple of tranches. What we're still expecting to happen this year in Australia is what's called the fair and reasonable test. So is it fair and reasonable that you're collecting this data and using it for a certain purpose? Which in a way kind of negates the need for a bunch of consent aspects as well. Because it's not fair and reasonable that you should make someone read, on average, I think the number was 43 minutes for the average Australian privacy policy to read. So I absolutely agree with you there, Klaudia, on that aspect. Coming back to the server-side tagging stuff as well, I think looking at that type of aspect, that's where, I mean, the majority of work that we do is manual audits of technologies across the customer experience layer, because a basic tag scan or one of these kind of quick cookie scans won't detect a bunch of this stuff, which is server to server in the background. And that's where you need to kind of get into the weeds and speak to each of your teams to see what they've done already that you may be missing. Because someone may have set this up as a like in your logo, Klaudia, with the little on button. It's very easy to turn something on, but people forget that's been done, and this data is going left, right, and center, server to server. Unless you kind of audit internally these kind of policies and processes, you'll miss that kind of stuff if server to server is part of what you're doing.
Indeed, and I think technology can help there. We like time is going by very quickly, so we'll now move to the last section of this session. We'll run a second poll on what you think your level of preparation is for 25. We'd be interested to hear from you. Klaudia, what is your prediction for 25? Where do you see us going as an industry or as professionals?
So very briefly, it's actually basically everything I talked about before. So whether we want it or not, the AI is in the spotlight. I think we can expect more enforcement action from data protection authorities. And as for the EU AI Act, I think first they will focus on the larger companies. And then I think we're moving from discussing AI ethics to more into action. So definitely we will all start or focus on implementing the EU AI Act into everyday business operations. And then I think also the data transfer is the topic to really monitor and start preparing right now. Map all of the data transfers, see what do you rely on as the transfer mechanism, because updates can come and they can also come at a pretty short notice. So I will finish in here.
Prepare a plan B in this area. That's right. Thank you, Claudia. Yeah, exciting to see these developments happening. You, Chris, on your side, what do you see as the main prediction for 25?
Look, I first of all, I want yourself and Claudia to tell everyone on the call that I made this prediction before DeepSeek happened, and also before Stargate
I can
happened as
testify.
well. So I think, and we're already starting to see this as well, new security regulations out of the US in regards to data security and so on. The speed at which you can now use AI to create competitive advantage means that it's not just going to be about, and this is just my thoughts, it's not going to be just about if you have access to the latest NVIDIA chips to do something or the best algorithm, you need the data also. And data itself about users and what they're doing. I mentioned earlier on that if you've got an app, that social media app is collecting more than just what you're doing in regards to dancing in front of the camera. It's collecting what time you dance, but also what websites you're visiting, what you're buying, and so on. The same with DeepSeek, when people are heavily focused on, when looking at DeepSeek, testing the Tiananmen Square aspect of it, but that's not really the most important thing to consider. It's considering what you're also sharing in regards to data about yourself. That, given what I just discussed around stitching and fingerprinting, can be added to other data. So let's just take the China-US aspect. If you look at Temu, if you look at ByteDance, and all of these other big businesses that US, European, and other country citizens use, there is so much data being collected that can be stitched and pivoted in certain ways to give so much advantage in regards to what products to create, how to ship them, where to ship them, and so on. So I think that's honestly going to be the key thing is data sovereignty and countries understanding that this is so imperative for us to keep hold of ourselves and advise our citizens about what they're using and what's being given away. Even just these plugins that people download think it's going to help them with AI. Who made that? Who made that plugin? Where's that data going? Yeah, so that's my view on the prediction side, like just the data sovereignty aspect.
Thank you, Chris. I think that's a solid one as well. It's true that these models require to be fed with a lot of data. So the race for data collection is going to probably accelerate. And even though some people are already talking about peak data, but that's another story, probably another webinar. I'll go last, and I'll try to be short for the sake of time. So my prediction, I think, is probably less fancy. It's a prediction around the standardization. So in the privacy space, I think standardization will be a key trend in 25. Standardization is critical for ensuring compliance. It's critical for the end users to build trust, but it's first and foremost critical for businesses to simplify the complexities of privacy management, and it reduces the cost of compliance as well. So it's very much the way to go for businesses that really want to make privacy a pillar of their customer relationship. So at Didomi, we think 25 will be the year of standardization. We've seen with Klaudia that regulation is starting to be more verticalized. So we also expect more verticalized privacy standards in the financial space, in the retail publisher space. There is a lot going on. So at Didomi, we think that's going to be framing the year. We are also seeing large organizations establish their own standards, the Google consent mode, the Microsoft consent mode. More consent mode will come. So it's another form of standardization. And with the fragmentation of privacy regulation happening in the US and more likely to increase with the current administration, we think that some sort of standardization is the only way to go. So standards is very simple, are very simple. So it's standardizing the information that is delivered to the end user in a digestible way. It's standardizing the way the user will control how data is collected, so opt-in, opt-outs, and the way to standardize how the user can indicate their willingness to stop, pause, or erase the data that has been collected. So more the privacy rights and privacy request standards. So standards are needed across all these areas, and we see that some of these areas are more standardized than others these days. So at Didomi, we think that it's our role to help that move forward because like standards will help privacy be an easy thing to do for organization. Okay, it's time. We had some questions over the course of the session. One, it's do you have insights regarding the topic and the risk of European Commission changing transfers of EU data to big US cloud providers? I think it transpires in both of your predictions, Chris and Klaudia. Do you think it's actually something we'll see in 25? Or do you have like a reason to believe?
Well, I think what you highlighted earlier on briefly in your conversation with Klaudia was that this can be used as a negotiation tactic. So I think when you see Donald Trump saying, "The EU are being unfair to us, very unfair," if he starts to put certain threats in, I think other aspects of this will come back as well to play as part of that. To be honest, and it comes as part of my prediction. So yeah, I do think they'll challenge it more and more. Yes, and obviously not just US, any big cloud provider, any provider whatsoever.
Thank you, Chris. Claudia, final word on this topic.
So I think that all privacy professionals knew from the beginning or had the prediction that it will not last. I think I can speak as all of us knew that the foundations are very, very shaky, and with one signature the whole deal actually can collapse. So we already predicted that long time ago. Sorry.
It's true. It's we've seen that coming, and so
Yeah.
I think the ingredients are all there for that to reach its logical conclusion. We'll see about that in 25. That's going to be again a very intense year from a data privacy standpoint. I'm sure all of us will be very busy. Let me thank you warmly for this session, Klaudia and Chris. Very rich insights and very cool perspectives on many themes. So on behalf of the audience, thanks a lot. We'll re-invite you probably next year to see what we've done and if we were right.
I would say feel free, and I'm sure Klaudia would be the same. Add us on LinkedIn if you've got any other questions that we didn't cover, especially if there's anything around Australian privacy. But we do a bunch of global work as well. But yeah, add me on LinkedIn if that's of use.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
And yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's a great idea. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Chris. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a great rest of the day wherever you are, and we'll see you at our next webinar. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye bye. Good night, Chris.